Tonight, somewhere above the Persian Gulf, long before sunrise touched the water, before financial markets opened in New York, London, Tokyo, or Shanghai, before news anchors stepped into brightly lit studios, and before social media even understood what was happening, a series of quiet signals began appearing across some of the most secure military networks on Earth. At first, the information looked routine, a radar return, then another. Naval operators aboard surveillance aircraft watching the Gulf initially believed they were tracking normal commercial traffic. Oil tankers moving through one of the busiest maritime corridors in the world. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent, just another night in one of the most heavily monitored regions on the planet. But within seconds, that assumption began to fall apart. The radar signatures kept growing. 10 contacts became 12, 12 became 16, 16 became 20. Then support vessels appeared, escort signatures. Electronic emissions, coordinated spacing, perfect formation discipline. Suddenly the atmosphere inside the command center changed completely. Voices dropped. Operators leaned closer to their screens. Senior officers were awakened. Additional satellite coverage was requested. Long-range surveillance drones were retasked in real time. What began as routine monitoring was now becoming something else entirely, something no one expected to see on this scale. A convoy of 20 massive tanker-class vessels moving directly toward one of the most strategically explosive waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. And as the first sunlight began to touch the surface of the water, military analysts across multiple continents were all asking the same terrifying question. Was this simply commercial traffic, or was this the beginning of the most dangerous maritime confrontation of the decade? Because in today's world, wars don't always begin with missiles. Sometimes they begin with movement, with logistics, with shipping lanes, with economic pressure, with quiet decisions made behind closed doors by men who understand that control over global energy may be just as powerful as control over armies. And tonight, in our dramatized scenario, the world may have just witnessed exactly that. To understand why what happened next matters so much, you first have to understand the geography of power. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a body of water. It is not just a shipping lane. It is not just a line on a map. It is one of the most important strategic choke points in human history. Every single day, millions of barrels of oil pass through this narrow corridor. Entire economies depend on it. Entire governments monitor it around the clock. Every tanker that enters these waters carries not only energy, but influence, leverage, political stability, economic survival. And for decades, the United States has treated Hormuz as one of the most critical strategic corridors on Earth. Carrier strike groups rotate through nearby waters. Destroyers equipped with advanced missile defense systems patrol constantly. Surveillance aircraft fly endless missions. Submarines operate silently beneath the waves. Intelligence satellites watch from orbit. Electronic listening platforms monitor every transmission, every vessel, every signal, every course adjustment, every change in speed. Because if Hormuz becomes unstable, the consequences don't stay in the Middle East. They spread everywhere. Fuel prices spike, supply chains break, manufacturing slows, insurance rates surge, political pressure rises, stock markets react, governments panic, entire economies begin to feel the shock within hours. That is why what happened this morning was so different. Because according to this fictional scenario, the vessels approaching Hormuz were not behaving like ordinary commercial traffic. They moved with discipline, precision, purpose. Their spacing was perfect. Their communications were controlled. Their course corrections were minimal. Their escort patterns looked almost military, not openly aggressive, not openly hostile, but calculated, coordinated, intentional. At exactly 04:47 local time, aboard an American reconnaissance aircraft flying high above international waters, radar specialists identified the first anomaly. Thermal signatures suggested that not every vessel in the convoy carried the same cargo weight. Some appeared fully loaded with crude oil. Others showed unusual internal heat distribution. One ship appeared heavier in the stern, another emitted electromagnetic signatures inconsistent with civilian tanker operations. Within 60 seconds, the information was transmitted to regional command. Within 90 seconds, U.S. naval intelligence officers began cross-checking vessel registries, insurance filings, satellite tracking data, ownership records, and electronic identification systems. What they found immediately raised concerns. Some ships were properly registered. Others showed recent flag changes. Some had missing insurance trails. Others had ownership structures passing through multiple shell corporations across several jurisdictions. The kind of patterns intelligence analysts often associate with covert strategic logistics. By 0453, the convoy had officially been reclassified from commercial traffic to strategic observation priority. That classification automatically triggered a chain of events that most people on Earth would never see. Surveillance drones shifted course, satellites changed imaging angles, carrier-based aircraft moved to pre-launch readiness, submarine tracking systems increased sensitivity, electronic warfare teams moved from passive monitoring to active collection. And inside secure facilities thousands of miles away, lights turned on in offices where some of the most powerful military and political leaders in the world were about to begin their day much earlier than expected. In Washington, secure communication lines began activating inside the Pentagon. Intelligence officers from multiple agencies were pulled into emergency morning briefings. National security advisors began reviewing live feeds from the Gulf. Energy analysts were asked to model potential market disruption. Naval commanders opened updated engagement protocols. By now, no one believed this was routine. Meanwhile, across the Pacific in Beijing, according to our fictional dramatization, maritime intelligence teams were already tracking the same developments. Large digital maps illuminated command screens. Satellite feeds focused on the Gulf. Shipping officials began reviewing tanker positions. Economic planners pulled up strategic petroleum reserve calculations. Military advisors started discussing possible interpretations. Was this a normal energy convoy, a demonstration of economic resilience, a strategic signal, or perhaps something much more dangerous, a deliberate test of American reaction capability in one of the world's most militarized waterways? At 0511, the first direct communication was sent from a U.S. destroyer operating nearby. Standard maritime protocol, clear identification request, confirm vessel registry, confirm escort composition, confirm intended route, confirm communications channels. Normally, in a region this heavily monitored, such requests receive immediate acknowledgement, but this time there was silence. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nothing. A second transmission was sent. Again, no response. The bridge of the destroyer fell silent. Officers watched live radar tracks. One escort vessel adjusted speed. Another changed heading by 2 degrees. Not enough to trigger immediate alarm, but enough to raise questions. Then a third vessel emitted a short burst of encrypted radio traffic. That changed everything. Electronic warfare officers immediately flagged the signal. Communications specialists began signal analysis. Was it civilian encryption, commercial routing data, or something else entirely? Within moments, the convoy was no longer being treated as unusual traffic. It was now being treated as a potential strategic event. At 0518, fighter crews aboard a nearby American carrier received launch orders. Engines ignited. Flight decks came alive. Ground crews moved with practiced precision. Pilots climbed into cockpits already loaded with live intelligence updates. Mission planners reviewed engagement protocols. Surveillance packages activated. Within minutes, aircraft were airborne, cutting across the morning sky toward the convoy below. Back on the carrier, command staff monitored every second, every fuel level, every signal, every course change, every heartbeat of the unfolding crisis. Above the water, the pilots began seeing what radar had already suggested. The convoy was real, massive, perfectly spaced, calm, controlled, and yet something about it felt wrong. The escort vessels maintained unusually disciplined intervals. Communications remained minimal. No one seemed surprised to see American aircraft overhead. That alone was enough to make experienced military planners uncomfortable. Back in Washington, market analysts had already begun noticing unusual energy trading patterns. Oil futures were moving before headlines appeared. Insurance companies quietly adjusted maritime risk calculations. Shipping brokers in Singapore and Dubai started rerouting traffic away from the Gulf. Commodity traders in London began receiving private intelligence updates. Social media remained silent, for now, but inside boardrooms, government offices, and military command centers, the tension was rising by the minute. At 0527, the U.S. Navy issued a second direct warning. Reduce speed, confirm escort intent, maintain declared route, identify immediately. Again, silence. Then, according to our fictional scenario, one escort vessel increased engine output, another shifted formation, a third activated a brief but powerful burst of electronic interference. Radar screens flickered, communications frequencies experienced short disruptions. Electronic warfare officers immediately compensated. Missile defense systems aboard nearby destroyers shifted to active readiness. Weapons officers confirmed target acquisition protocols. Carrier-based pilots received final updates. The atmosphere in every command center changed instantly, because now, for the first time, this no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked like a test, and somewhere behind closed doors, leaders across the world understood exactly what was happening. Because in the modern era, power is not only measured by armies or nuclear weapons, it is measured by access, by logistics, by who controls the routes that keep economies alive. And right now, in the waters of Hormuz, 20 tankers and a handful of escort vessels may have just triggered the most dangerous strategic calculation of the year. At 0531, the final warning was transmitted. Clear, direct, immediate. Reduce speed, hold position, confirm identification. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, one escort vessel accelerated. Another shifted aggressively across the formation. A third activated stronger electronic countermeasures. And in that moment, commanders made the decision that would send shockwaves through global markets, military alliances, and geopolitical strategy for months to come. What followed lasted less than 12 minutes, but would be analyzed for years. Carrier-based aircraft moved first. Precision warning flares lit up the sky above the convoy. Destroyers adjusted formation. Missile systems locked. Drones activated live targeting overlays. Electronic warfare saturated the area with signal disruption. Communications collapsed. Distress frequencies exploded with traffic. Some tankers attempted emergency turns. Others held course. Escort vessels broke formation. One support ship reportedly lost propulsion after a precision disabling strike. Seconds later, another vanished from active radar. Smoke rose over the water. Thermal imaging showed heat plumes spreading across multiple contacts. The convoy, once perfectly coordinated, was now descending into chaos. And then the markets reacted. Oil surged before headlines even hit the media. Shipping insurers froze policy updates across the Gulf. Tanker routes were suspended. Freight operators triggered emergency contingency plans. Asian markets opened in panic. European exchanges prepared for shock. Energy ministers across multiple governments were awakened by urgent calls. Social media began flooding with unverified footage. Smoke over the water, ships drifting, emergency signals, rescue operations, naval aircraft circling overhead, and suddenly the whole world was asking the same question. Was this a warning or the beginning of something much bigger? Because if 20 tankers in Hormuz could trigger this level of military response, what would happen if similar pressure appeared in the South China Sea, in the Strait of Malacca, in the Indian Ocean, in the Taiwan corridor? Suddenly, what happened in Hormuz was no longer just about energy. It was about the future of global power, about who controls the arteries of trade, about whether economic dependence can become strategic vulnerability, about whether the next great conflict will begin not with soldiers crossing borders, but with ships crossing choke points. And tonight, behind closed doors in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, Tokyo, and Brussels, one terrifying reality may now be impossible to ignore. The world's supply lines are no longer just economic infrastructure. They are battlefields, and if today was only the warning, then tomorrow may change everything.